The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Now, today we are talking in the suspense, thriller, organized crime. All that sounds like politics. No. And so we've got a Canadian author who's got a newer book out called A Web of Deceit. Gary McGugan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, we'll see if you're happy at the end. You never know. So it looks like you've had quite the history. It looks like you were a business person. You were a guy that's a consultant, business leader, and you've done all sorts of jobs. What made you get into writing?
Well, I had a wonderful career. I'm very grateful for all the opportunities that I had to work with some excellent corporations and accumulate some great experiences. And when I retired, exactly 13 years ago right now, as a matter of fact, I retired. And at that stage, a colleague of mine and a longtime friend decided that what we would like to try to do is give back to folks that were emerging in the business world some of the benefit of some of the insights that we've been able to gain over the years. So we co-authored actually a work of nonfiction to start out, and it was a book called Needs Selling Solutions, and we used that as the foundation for our consulting business, which we operated for 10 years. And basically from that, learned that while writing is, of course, demanding and has lots of challenges with it, my lifelong interest in writing was actually kindled more by that experience, and I started to think about the opportunity to write fiction. And for 3 or 4 years, thought about it and started working, and now I've actually published 5 novels and having a great time and working on the 6th.
Well, but coming from, because a lot of writers are people that have written their whole life, and so they get comfortable in their own skin, and they get comfortable with being able to write and not worry about feedback and stuff, this whole social media world. But for someone like yourself, when did you feel enough confidence, or what was it that gave you that confidence to be able to publish a book and kind of go, well, here it is?
Well, I think I've always had an interest in reading, and I think anyone who has an interest in reading has an interest in writing on some level. And I think throughout my business career, whether I was writing a business letter or working on some ad copy or preparing a presentation, whatever the task that I happened to be involved with that involved working with words, I always took a lot of pride. And in so doing, I think I honed writing skills as a business person, so that when it came time to write, I did have a good level of basic confidence. And I'm also the sort of an individual that believes that life is a continuous learning process. So I'm very happy to welcome feedback, and have tried to move up the learning curve of effective writing as quickly and as effectively as I can.
Well, what do you consider yourself as? Like, what kind of writer, if someone picks up one of your books, what are they getting?
Well, I hope that they feel that they're getting very entertaining suspense stories. I always write with an element of crime, and I almost always write with a fairly heavy component of the corporate life built in as well. That started from the old adage that we should write what we know about. And I think I understand and have lived the corporate life as well as anybody. So I try to incorporate a fair amount of what I like to think of as realism into the story, so that although it is fiction and the plots are are pure fiction, they're purely the product of my wild imagination, they do feel that they, if not are real, could be real.
Do you find that your business career with deadlines and such has made you a more efficient storyteller?
I think it's made me a more efficient writer. I don't know if it's made me a more efficient storyteller, but as a writer, I think I have a fair amount of discipline, which I think is a characteristic that a good writer needs. I like to write virtually every day for 3 hours. Basically, my 9 to 12 window every morning is writing. And when we set aside that time, we do it as a matter of discipline, and we keep forging forward. It's remarkable how many words we can get down.
Well, I can't write that way. I've tried that several times, but every time I set up a time and I sit down, I'm just not in the mood. So that's crazy, because I find that I block a lot of times, or if I'm not in the mood, the writing's not going to be good. So I kind of will sit down, then I end up not writing.
And I know a lot of people that approach it that way as well, that have a challenge. I think that's one of the things that does carry over from the business career. It's we set aside a time to do things and proceed to do it. I also have another habit that some writers may or may not have, but I love to walk. And I try to get out every day that the weather allows me to get out. And I like to walk for about 1.5 to 2 hours at a fairly brisk pace. And basically, I don't use a headset or listen to music or anything like that. I just think during that period of time. So typically, when I go out this afternoon, I'll be working on, in my brain, tomorrow's writing, and thinking about what challenges I have to overcome in the story, the technical issues that I may have to deal with, plot adjustments, or purely new copy. And as a result, when I get up the following morning and I'm ready to go, I actually feel ready to go, because I kind of thought it all out previously, and now I really just have to put the words to paper.
So you're writing about what you know about, so you've got the experience. Does that mean you're a criminal in the corporate world?
No, it does not.
Just I thought I'd check, right? Because
we won't tell anybody.
Yeah.
This is where I have to evoke that fiction plea. No, I have been in business from a perspective where we get to see a lot of the insides of corporations as they were customers of ours. About 21 years of my career was involved in the world of commercial finance. And we lent money to corporations, and we actually lent to businesses of all size. We have lines of credit as low as 100,000, and the largest one that I worked on was 150 million. So we covered that gamut. And as one works on those kinds of sort of intimate details about companies, the financial statements and the backgrounds that one has to look at to make a decision on granting credit, it is actually quite surprising how much one can learn about the kind of people that they're dealing with or proposing to deal with. And again, I treated that as an education and a wonderful opportunity to learn. So some of the insights that I get from the criminal side, while I may not have had a direct involvement with, was able to sort of piece together from bits and pieces of information that we would accumulate.
So what do you think, being in the corporate world, and now you're writing these suspense thrillers, in general, what do people get wrong about the corporate world? So and I mean this so people like me or David or people just in the regular world who are not part of it, we probably have some sort of idea what we think of corporations. You know, there's a general population thought on corporations. What do you think we get wrong?
Well, I think one of the activities that I really enjoy doing is going out to signing events, and I do a lot of work with bookstores like Chapters and Indigo, and get to meet a lot of their customers that way. And it's interesting when I'm talking with some of these folks, and of course they ask me what the book's about and that sort of thing. I give a little bit of a description, and it's surprising how many people will reply, "Ooh, business? No, I get enough of that at work. I don't want any of that stuff." and of course, what they're visualizing is the sort of mundane water cooler talk and the rumors, the innuendo, a lot of the political stuff that goes on in corporations, and they're presuming that it's that kind of boring stuff that I'm going to deal with in the book. And of course, I try to make sure that nothing could be farther from the truth. I think the way I'm writing these stories, I write it from the most senior levels of the organization, and from the perspectives of what goes on in what they call the C-suite, the executive suite. And at that level, there is actually a fundamentally different world and a fundamentally different ecosystem than the great majority of people would relate to when they actually think about business and corporations. Yeah,
it's pretty interesting. So let's take your newest book, A Web of Deceit. So the title itself kind of sets it up, I imagine. So your main characters in there, I see you've got a fugitive, Howard Knight, and then you've got the CEO, Suzanne Simpson, I believe it is. How much of yourself, which one of those characters are you?
Oh, I hope neither one are me.
Well, you know, it's just like, I mean, when a writer writes, a lot of times they put some of themselves into that character, right? When in a fiction. And I just wonder do you do that, or are they completely made up?
I like to think that I have created a point of view for each of the characters, and I would add a third one into the story, A Web of Deceit, Fidelia Morales as well. She is a major character, so I have three of them there, and I do my best to create a very distinct point of view for each of those three. I would like to think that none of them actually resemble me, although obviously small things must creep their way in, but I don't do that consciously. And I do try to create very unique and distinct characters. Suzanne Simpson, for an example, is a chief executive officer, as you say, who actually was born in Canada, grew up in Quebec, and made her business career in the U.S. So that in itself is quite an interesting profile, and brings with it a lot of great things that we can do. Doesn't fit my job description at all. Howard Knight, he's a fugitive, as you say, but the connection to Multima Corporation, where Suzanne Simpson is the CEO, is that Howard Knight, prior to going on the run, was actually a director of that corporation. And he made a big mistake, had to escape, and he was on the run from the organization and some other elements. And then Fidelia Morales, who is the third character that I mentioned, is a very interesting woman who grew up in Puerto Rico, won a scholarship to Columbia University in New York, graduated with distinction, and after a few years of practicing law, became disenchanted and moved to the prostitution business, where she got tied up in the organization. And when we catch up with her in A Web of Deceit, she is actually the first woman to head the organization. So I think of these as three rather fascinating characters and try to build a good story around that.
Strong female characters. And I tend to do the same in my fiction. How do you get into the mind of your female characters?
I think one of the things that I've always tried to do throughout my business career is promote the interests of women. Several women that reported to me at various times in the years have ended up in senior roles, vice presidents, complete business leaders, CEO or president. And I have always considered that to be a little bit of a challenge. When I entered the business world, women were very seldom considered valuable management assets. I think that would be a very fair comment to make. They were good workers, they had a role, they made great secretaries and clerks, but very few business people considered women for management roles. Now that's changed dramatically in the last 50 years, of course. But I think I was among the early promoters of trying to help women advance their careers, and by being a mentor to several women in the United States, Canada, Europe, it gave me a great opportunity to better understand the way they think about a lot of things. So when I have these events come along or these incidents come along, I try to transpose and think back to some of those conversations that we had and what kinds of reactions they might have. And usually I get it pretty close. Not always, but usually. And I attribute that sort of lifelong promotion of women as the main factor in being able to do that.
Interesting.
So where do your characters come from then? Like where is it that you find them? Is this like are you at a coffee shop and you see someone and kind of pick up on their vibe, or are you like David? You hear voices in your head. Where do they actually come from?
They come from these long walks. When I need to develop a character, I actually develop those characters for the most part during those long walks. What sort of attributes do they probably need to be interesting? How are we going to be able to create the conflict? Where will be their redeeming values, and so on? I try to create a picture of that individual in my mind, and by the time it's the time to start writing, I can usually envisage pretty clearly what that person looks like, how they talk, what their ideas are, and what values they have or don't have.
Speaking of hearing voices, do you have, when you write, do you have an inner monologue going on in your mind? Because some people have this when they write or when they read. Others see images and symbols and kind of transfer that to the page. Do you have a specific way that you do that? Can you hear the voices as you're, or they hear the voices of the characters as you're writing?
Yeah, I would say I lean more towards hearing the voices rather than visualizing. When I'm out doing those walks, I talk to myself and have very good conversations. I try out different lines. I try out different voices. I try different ways of talking, so that, as I say, it does create a visual picture for me. But I would say it comes primarily from listening to the voices.
That's interesting. So now the actual story itself, what's the basic premise of A Web of Deceit?
Well, the basic premise is the newly appointed, self-appointed head of the organization has decided that she is going to remake the organization for a number of reasons. The story takes place right at the start of the pandemic in the beginning of 2020. So, first of all, their very lucrative prostitution business was being negatively impacted as they weren't getting as many visitors and as much revenue because people were fearful. As a woman, she had some, I wouldn't say reservations, but perhaps a little bit of guilt about the way that some of the women had been treated and less voluntarily recruited into the organization. So I think there's a little bit of that underlying guilt. And the other component was that she was also a very good learner. And over the years, she had picked up a great deal of knowledge about finance, how it worked, how the stock markets worked, where there might be some vulnerable points. And she surrounded herself with some people who could help her penetrate those vulnerable points. And she saw that as a very not risk-free, but risk-averse way of generating hundreds of millions of dollars. So the story starts out with her looking from that perspective. At the same time, we have Multima Corporation, unfortunately subjected to some legal issues related to money laundering and connected to someone in the Justice Department of the United States who is very close to the White House. And we have a story rattling out from there at the same time as the organization is looking for a great way to make some new revenue. And Howard Knight, who is trying to avoid it all, becomes mixed up in both of those components.
So, now, do you, with your characters and that, do you also write, like, how do I say, the things that go on between the characters as a character itself? So let's say, fate and misfortune and opportunity is what you say kind of is what happens in the story. You use that. Right. Are they characters in themselves?
I don't write them to be characters, but clearly they have a role to play. And I think that the misfortune is fairly easy to identify, and I think the opportunity is fairly easy to identify.
Now, in your locations, what kind of settings do you use for a book like Web of Deceit?
Well, in all my stories, I have a fairly international flavor to all of them, because that's the world that I lived in, and if it wasn't for COVID, would continue to be living in. I really think of myself as a global citizen, and I've had the good opportunity to visit 42 different countries, and one of the exercises that I did early in COVID-19 when I couldn't travel anymore was I did a compilation of the number of cities that I visited over that period of time as well, and I had the opportunity to visit over 650 cities as well. So I think of the story taking place on a global basis, and in the Web of Deceit, for example, we have Howard Knight starting out in the Caribbean, and only a few days later is in Asia, and we have Fidelia Morales the story starting out with her in Europe and ending up also over in Asia. So the movement and the flights and the cross-border activity and so on, to me is all just a fundamental part of how I write the stories, and I think is one of the components that gives it a little bit of that extra intrigue, because of course a lot of readers haven't had an opportunity to visit some of those spots.
Yeah, I think it adds a lot, and I think it's something that even other writers have to go out and find out about when they're writing in a certain location, so because it has to sound fairly real, like the setting,
Mm-hmm.
and the research has to come across that way. Was it a struggle with the COVID and writing that at the time in a book like this? Because when you're writing modern day times, how do you deal with something that's going on that there's no answer for?
Well, I really gave it a lot of thought before I decided that I would introduce COVID, because I think I rightly anticipated that it was, going to take quite a bit of time to resolve. I recognized even back last April when I started writing that we weren't dealing with a 60-day or a 90-day phenomenon, that this is something that would go on for a year or two. And I expected that by the time I finished the story, about the last thing that people would want to read about was the pandemic.
Right.
And as a result, I didn't want it to become a focal point of the story. But I thought that also, because my stories also usually follow a timeline, and I thought that it would be very unrealistic to tell a story that was taking place in 2020 without at least involving the pandemic to some extent. So what I tried to do was make references to the pandemic where I thought it was appropriate, but not let it become, shall we say, a subplot or a serious player in the story. It's there. They're dealing with some of the issues related to it, but it's in the background, and I think I did that reasonably well.
Yeah, and you also you're using the idea of deceit and organized crime. Now, I think a lot of people think that organized crime left. It's not really like mafia and all that. It's all gone. What's the effect of organized crime on business world?
Well, I think that, of course, organized crime has not gone away, and I think although a lot of attention is not given to it, the impact that the organized elements have on the business world are very, very, very great impacts. I think, I was reading an article the other day that talked about it, and there's a little quote that I picked up that I'll share with you. It says, "Mafias are not static structures. They evolve and mutate and increasingly resemble the rest of society." And I think that's a very good description of where organized crime is in the business world, because it is today very difficult for even experts to ascertain what level of involvement criminal elements may or may not have. These folks have become so expert at camouflaging, at the same time as investors probably know less about companies and the people who make up the companies than at any time in the past. When we look at some of the things, the shenanigans that can go on in a stock market where literally billions of dollars can be made in just a few days by companies that are virtually unknown, you know that a lot of those investors have not probably given 30 seconds thought to the people who are making up those companies and what characteristics and what values those people have that are going to be running that company. And I think this is very dangerous for both the stock markets, the world of finance, and our society generally, because the mafia fundamentally are a bunch of bullies who want to control. And the greater that they are able to exert that control, I think the less comfortable it will become for society as a whole.
A subtext or something, when someone picks up one of your books and reads it, takes it home, is there something you want them to take away from the book besides the story?
Well, like I think most fiction writers, I certainly want them to first and foremost find it entertaining. That's my goal. Is when I sit down to write, is to put pen to paper for a very entertaining story. But I think as a subtext in every book, you'll notice that I do have components that I hope people are going to think about a little bit, and organized crime is one of those. In The Web of Deceit, I focus on technology and how sophisticated technology can really be disruptive to our stock markets, and how how technology can interfere with smooth operating companies around the globe. In earlier books, I've dealt with the human trafficking problem and some of the, of course, the involvement organized crime has with that, but also I've dealt with some of the negative consequences for our society and so on. So I think in each of the books, I probably do have a little bit of subtext, and I'm hopeful that people will give it some thought. But in none of the stories, I think you would say I've written so that those themes become dominant. I like them to be in the background while people are entertained with what I hope they'll find a very suspenseful story.
What advice would you give to a person who is either retired or nearing retirement, who wants to make writing their next career?
Well, I'm not sure that I would have some profound advice. I'll share a little bit of what I've learned from the experience, and one of the things that I have personally found very helpful is involvement in a writing community. Like I suppose a lot of writers, when I started out, I thought of it as a very solitary activity, and when I wrote my first novel, I had no particular support network other than the editors that I worked with and so on. As I learned about a writing community in our area, I became a member, and over the past few years have become very enthralled with the organization, if you like. It's great to have a network of contacts who are doing the same sort of thing, who are facing many of the same challenges, who are developing some of the same skills. And I belong to a community called the Writers Community of York Region. And we have about 85 members, and monthly we have people come in and speak to us about various components of writing. The session I attended last week was a 2-hour session devoted purely to point of view. And we had a very good author and coach who is expert in the area of point of view, who shared with the group her observations and her learnings over the year. And those kinds of craft enhancements, I think, can really help individual writers to tell better stories more quickly. And although I think all 5 of my books are very good stories, I think, like most writers, I think my 5th one is, from a craft perspective, of course, stronger than my first. And I'm hoping that the 6th will be even stronger again. So if there is someone who wants to start writing, and I wouldn't reserve it only for people at age of retirement, I'd suggest that as early as possible, connecting with the writers community and benefiting from that kind of from networking and expertise.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting change in lifestyle when you do that. Did you ever look back at your first book and kind of reread it and think about wanting to change it?
No, I do reread it. I started after my 3rd book. I realized when I was out talking at some of these promotional events, I realized that I was sometimes starting to blend a little bit of the information from the first 3, and I wanted to stop that right away. So by design, I do read each of my books again each year. So I try to keep things very fresh and differentiated that way, so that when we have this kind of a conversation, I can talk comfortably about each of the books without fear of giving away too much information about one when I go into the other, and so on. But I think that that's a healthy way to look at it.
So, yeah, do you have a website or a place that you like people to come and find out about you?
Absolutely, and that's at Gary D. McGugan Books, and it's all one word. And people just need to remember to put that initial D in between Gary and McGugan. So Gary D. McGugan Books. And at that website, I have all of the books featured. We have lots of reviews for each of the books for people who'd like to check out what the more objective people are saying about the stories. And also there's more information about me for people who are interested in learning more about my background and influences, and I welcome anybody to visit Gary D. McGugan Books.
Great. Now we'll have that up on our website too, so people can find it, or if they forget, and they can just do one click. Very interesting. So what's next for Gary?
I'm working on novel number 6, and it will be again a suspense thriller. And it will also include all 3 of these major characters, Suzanne, Howard, and Fidelia. And I think that it will carry on from where we left off in A Web of Deceit. But it will take a very different direction, still very global in nature, obviously still in the period of the pandemic. But I think readers will find that again, I will tweak the values of the characters to adapt to the changing plot and circumstances and incidents that they're going to encounter. And I think that one thing I do like to point out is that although my stories run along a little bit of a time continuum, it's not necessary to read the books in order. As a writer, of course, I'd be delighted if everybody read from 3 Weeks Less a Day all the way through. But if you choose to just try out one of the books, any one of the books, I think will give you a good idea of the story, and they are all self-contained. But I do find ways of continuing on and linking them to the predecessor as I'm creating the story.
Well, is this the first time you've done kind of a sequel, like where you have characters reoccur from one book to another, or have you done this before?
Suzanne Simpson has appeared in 4 of the stories. Howard Knight has appeared in all 5 of the stories so far, and as he will in the 6th. Fidelia Morales has appeared in 3 of the stories and had a major role in only 1. So we have those, there is some change in the major characters, but there is some continuity. And I like to also think about that a little bit like a corporate life, because if you look at a corporation over a 5 or a 10-year period, there will be some people who manage to survive and thrive and are there throughout that whole period. But you will have others that come and go, for very, various reasons, and they're there for various time periods. So my stories are a little bit like that, and a little reflection of the corporate life, if you like, where we can still have a continuum, but not always with necessarily the same players in the same roles.
I guess how do you keep track of that? Like what you've given away about a character in one book and then 5 books later, how do you make sure that you don't, you go off track or make a mistake or have to do something, or if a particular character might not fit a certain thing that you have them do?
Well, my basic technique is to hope that I don't have a memory failure. I do not make copious notes. I do not keep track of all of the small intimate details. I know some writers do, and I remember watching there was an event once where the Canadian author Terry Fallis was explaining how he outlines a story, and it reminded me of a schematic for building an automobile. He had it so well organized and where every piece fit and so on. I don't have that. So far, I do have a good memory, and I won't say that I have never made a mistake and dropped off, but so far my editors have been able to catch those occasional lapses, and we fix them before we get to publication, and I'm hoping that the memory holds out.
Well, you can only hope, That's how it goes. I mean, it's well, you've done it all. I mean, you worked at a supermarket. You've done everything. Writer, everything. And for people in the Toronto area, if you see a man walking around talking to himself, and don't be surprised if it's not Gary, because you don't want to. But don't call the cops on him right away.
Not right away.
Not right away. Give him some time. Well, it's certainly been an interesting time, and I'm glad you came on, and hopefully things keep going well for you, and it sounds like it. The book we're talking about is A Web of Deceit, and we've been talking to its author about writing and how he got into it. So thank you for being here, Gary.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been a real pleasure speaking with both of you.
Thanks, Gary.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end!
I'll see you.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.